In this segment, we're going to be talking about you and your taxes. Now, if you're in the middle class or you're striving to get there, your taxes are not going to go up. In fact, you've likely already gotten money back from Uncle Sam this year thanks to President Biden's stimulus plan. But if you're in the top 1%, congratulations, but you are likely to get a higher tax bill if the president gets his way. The White House eyeing a doubling of the capital gains tax rate for people who earn more than $1 million a year. Also, they want to raise the tax rate for the top bracket by about 3 points to nearly 40%. Now, all that would do, I should mention, is bring us back to pre-Trump levels. Republicans are, of course, predictably freaking out, but some of the people who would have to pay more are actually fine with a higher tax bill. My next guest, one of them. He just penned a piece for CNN.com, and the headline reads, "I'm part of the 1%. We need to acknowledge that the deck has been stacked in our favor." Let's bring him in now. John Macintosh, he's a former private equity investor who now runs a nonprofit. John, thank you. And I'm sure we know a lot of the same people or same types of people. And the refrain I've been hearing for the past year, especially for folks in financial services, Rich, I've worked about a third as hard as I ever did, and I've had the best year I've ever had on record. It's an oversimplification, but if you've been in financial services, you've had to almost work not to have a banner year. Can you explain to our audience why?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thanks so much for having me on the show. I think that the last year and a half has certainly really exacerbated the inequality that we've had, going back really starting in 1980. And as you said, I think that there are a lot of folks who have been able to sit at home or in their second home and have been making money off the appreciation in the market, the volumes in the market. And, after that bump, when first COVID came out, since then, the markets have been raging. And in fact, they were raging during much of the Trump era, which gave those of us who were benefiting from it, but were also deeply, deeply concerned about the way the country was going, a really uncomfortable feeling that here we were absolutely against policies which, at the same time, in the short run, were making us wealthier. It's been really an extraordinary year, extraordinary 4 years, quite frankly.
And you have some reactions to some of the prescriptions that have been mentioned I want to get to in a second, but in terms of state of mind, and some of this I grant you is anecdotal, but I remember talking not long ago to a trust fund guy. And for folks at home who don't know the type, this is somebody who really since their 40s hasn't worked a day in their lives and has lived very comfortably off of an inheritance. And he was taken aback, John, that the stimulus was being given to folks who weren't working. And I asked him if he didn't see the irony in his statement, but he couldn't understand where I was coming from this. And I bring that up because I can go back to even in '08 with a lot of folks that were involved with the subprime mortgage crisis, who issued a lot of these loans to unsophisticated investors with no income verifications. And again, I heard in so many ways and forms, well, you know what, they shouldn't have taken the mortgage in the first place. The lack of contrition, the lack of accountability from some of those folks, I think in many ways, we can't be shocked where we are now, 12, 13 years later. Have you seen, even just tonally, a generational difference as the gap keeps getting bigger and bigger? There's no or very little in the way of people feeling bad about the excesses and actually resentment that there's efforts to not level it, but at least try and pick the bottom up a little bit.
Look, we all have a complex interior life. I can't speak for how people feel or should feel. I think what I tried to say in my piece is that for those people who are fortunate through hard work, through luck, through whatever it is, to have done very well financially, and who have said that there are things that they really feel the country should be doing, from reckoning with a history of racism through to investing in our obviously crumbling infrastructure, through to trying to take the sorts of steps that may prevent the world from burning up in a climate catastrophe. At least for those people, they have to stay the course and they can't complain if their taxes go up. Like, at least for those people, hypocrisy is such a devastating charge that now perhaps we're being put to the test, because for a long time, it was pretty easy in the top 1% to say you were for all these things, but also to sleep easily because you knew that, Chuck Schumer wasn't going to work hard to close the carried interest exemption or whatever it was. And so we've been in an era for a long time when we could talk about all the call it progressive things or more progressive things we wanted to do, but we didn't have to pay for them. And now I think with the Biden plan, with people's taxes going up, at least those who've said for years and years and years that this is the kind of stuff they wanted to see, they can't pull back. They can't lose their faith. They have to, be willing to pay for the things that they've always said they wanted, because if not them, who?
And that begs the question, because if you look through a historical prism, and listen, I'm no apologist. I believe in capitalism. I think it is one of the greatest, accelerators of this country in our short history. That said, this is not confiscatory, at least from a historical level, John, what Biden's talking about. I reference people, go back to the days of Eisenhower when we're talking about income tax rates. I remember, interest rates when I was a young guy that were well into the double digits in the Carter years, et cetera. So what's being talked about here, A, is not unprecedented, but B, it's not nearly as tough as we've seen it even in our country's short history.
Absolutely. Look, I think you have to step back and look at the larger span of history. Nobody I know, and I've been fortunate over my life to know some very entrepreneurial people. Nobody I know would say, "Oh, if the capital gains rate was a little higher, I wouldn't have started that tech company, or I wouldn't have started this restaurant chain," or whatever it is. I just don't think that that's the way real people are driven. Particularly at the high end. I think it's quite frankly, it's ridiculous. And I think, however, that, we know the endowment effect is real, that giving up something is much harder, even if you never thought you'd get it. And these sort of taxes won't take wealthy people back where they were 4 years ago, like far from it. And so I think people do need to put that in context. And again, our infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. There needs to be investments in green energy. We need to I think, more than many, so-called sort of neoliberals might have thought, we need to make sure that for both moral and political reasons, we create jobs in parts of the country where there's a great need. And who's going to pay for that right now? If not the wealthy who have done so well, which is not to take away from people's hard work and education and drive, but who've done so well, really on an almost uninterrupted basis since 1980.
John, where is the line? I mentioned confiscatory because if you add up the numbers, let's say for New York and California, I think Bloomberg had it that it's about 52% and change if you add up state and federal capital gains tax rates. And in California, I think it's north of 56%. At what point do you understand if somebody says, screw this, Rich, I'm moving to Florida? And I know some of the folks, I'm sure you do as well, especially further complicated because in the last year, people can do things more remotely than they did before. I'm not going to be moving, but do you understand when those folks say it, or is it a knee-jerk reaction that's more out of panic than fact?
Look, I think I was born in Canada, but I naturalized last year because I felt, your fight was my fight, and it was time to muck in the way that only a citizen can. And I think, so now I say this as an American, one of the challenges is that some of these things really need to be done at the federal level and with federal leadership, because you can't expect people to say, what, I don't need to do this, but I'm voluntarily going to. I don't need to do this, but I'm going to. And I think staying, for example, in a higher tax city or state when it is easy to work from elsewhere is something. It's very hard to put individuals in that position and to judge them for making decisions that are better for them, which I think is why on some of these issues what we need is a federal response, so that you don't have as much individual incentive to move. I think asking people sometimes to do things at the individual level is not reasonable. It's not realistic, which is why I've been keen to see this capital gains as a federal thing, because it doesn't matter where you go in the country, you're still going to pay.
And I really appreciate what you wrote, because it's not just, stiff upper lip, but also why it's not only important, but people might actually feel better about being part of the sacrifice on the other side of the end. John Macintosh, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, everyone, wow, what a difference a year makes. I'm going to show you with video where Trump was a year ago to the day here in the White House, one of the most infamous episodes about COVID, and we'll contrast that with how this White House is dealing with the same pandemic. It's not just about COVID, a lot more that shows us in 12 months how different we are as a country. Stay with us.